All right, everyone. Thanks again for joining me. Welcome to episode 37 of This Week is Live. I'm your host, Raymond Flowchat from mxdwn.com. That's Mixdown. So glad to see you well. Thanks for joining us. Lots of stuff to cover, and I'm so sad to report this is going to be a bit of a bummer show. I'm so sorry. Sometimes that is the way of the world, and the news gods are not cooperative, and I'm not super happy to bring a lot of the news that I have to bring to you today, but it is unfortunately what's happening. We do have some happier things to discuss and some happier things to chop up, and also kind of a fun interview that comes from one of our many Summer Games Fest pieces at the end of the show. So basically, just to speak a little bit about that before we get into the rest of the stories and today's editorial, effectively, this is another one in a series of our interviews that we and Zach Dalton, our games editor, and I did at Summer Game Fest Playdays, which is kind of the heir apparent to E3 and a private event for press and media and people who have to do with the game industry. And we did a whole bunch of on-the-scene interviews with a whole bunch of wonderful people about all these great titles that were being showcased there. Today, the interview that we are going to include is with Adam Hines, the creative director, and Bryant Cannon, lead engineer from Night School Studio, the developer behind the wonderful choose your own adventure, video game Oxenfree 2 Lost Signals, which is the sequel to the original Oxenfree. So we have that interview for you at the end of the show, just like we did with Trick from Magic the Gathering last week. So please stick around at the end of the show for that interview. Now, let's dive into headlines and what's going on in the world. We're going to start with the happiest news that we have today. I figured we should start on a good note. Barbie, in its third week of release, massively successful film, part of the whole Barbenheimer craze with Oppenheimer coming out the same weekend. And of course, this performed even better than Oppenheimer, Christopher Nolan's Oppenheimer. Barbie in 3 weeks has crossed $1.03 billion gross at the box office. And that's significant enough because it's very hard to get to the point where you can do that kind of box office no matter what movie you are. It's a huge feat to get to that level of success. I mean, you're looking at like James Cameron's movies, Avatar, the Marvel movies, and then, Minions, Despicable Me, stuff like that, big animation features that are massively successful. Not all of them even make it that far. Well, this is significant not only in that it passed $1.03 billion, but this is the first time that a solo female director has been at the helm of a movie that's grossed more than $1 billion. I know. This is a big shock to me as to anyone else that it's taken this long before that can even be said. I'm honestly surprised that was a stat that had not happened before, but there we are. So congratulations to Greta Gerwig and the success and everyone that had to do with the film Barbie is kind of like an important note. So there were other things where there were co-directors, like say Captain Marvel, Marvel's Captain Marvel from 2019, which did $1.13 billion, but that was co-directed by Anna Boden and Ryan Fleck. So that wasn't just a female solo director. So Barbie is the first time for that. Congratulations to everyone involved. It's obviously the hit of the summer and what has been a really successful stretch for movie theaters and the movie business, which is, of course, also unfortunate because this time, 3-4 months from now, the movies are going to start running out. So everyone's been talking about how movie theaters have been going out of business left, right, and center because of the pandemic and everything that's happened. Now people are finally starting to go to the movies again. There's not going to be any movies. But on the plus side, I'm sure women of the world that are movie fans and fans of women creating art are on some level like looking around and kind of whispering, suck it, Bechdel test. So let's move on to the unfortunate and sad news, which there is just a barrel full today. First and foremost, 6'2" Rodriguez, better known by his stage name, just simply Rodriguez, has passed away at the age of 81. According to his family in his home city of Detroit, he died from a short illness. Now, if you're not familiar with Rodriguez is a wonderful singer and an incredible talent, but one of those many talents over the last 4 or 5 decades that did really great work that just didn't resonate with people when it was initially released, at least here in America. Now, in 2012, there was a wonderful documentary movie called Searching for Sugar Man. And the whole premise of this documentary was about how Rodriguez had become kind of an unknowing, unaware hero, like superstar in South Africa as it tried to reconcile and rise above the whole apartheid situation that was happening there in that country. Now, meanwhile, Rodriguez completely got out of the music business in the early 70s after his, famed album Cold Fact and, did a follow-up record and then basically just stopped trying because it wasn't a big success. Labels were behind him. A lot of people were excited to try to help him have a career and it just didn't take off. Sometimes things just don't work out. Yet then apparently he became like a living legend in South Africa and had no idea. And through an even stranger set of circumstances, apparently the money that would have been made from that maybe never made to him. A lot of that is covered in the documentary. So, 6'2" Rodriguez himself and his family were basically unaware that he had become a superstar all those years later in South Africa and remained that and became kind of a mythic figure. So Searching for Sugar Man documents that whole story and his eventual return to South Africa and then how he does a bunch of triumphant shows there. And we also got a chance in the few short years that he was touring after that. He didn't consistently tour every year in the years after that, but we got to cover him at Coachella, and we don't have a lot of over the shoulders or chyrons or graphics in this because we always air the show live. But after the fact, and at this point, we'll try to put a little right there of a photo that I took of him 10 years ago at Coachella, where it was a really wonderful set and was a really great show. But rest in peace, 6'2" Rodriguez. Also, in tragic death news, like I said, it's going to be a bummer show today, and my apologies in advance. That's just the way it is. William Friedkin, to the world of movies, kind of a legendary director that maybe lately hasn't had many things that people have gone gaga for, but for these two films alone, you should know who this guy is and what he's capable of. William Friedkin was the director of The Exorcist and The French Connection. Now, The Exorcist is obviously a legendary horror movie, but The French Connection is probably like the longest car chase I've ever seen in a movie, one of the most thrilling action sequences ever shot. And that's most of the movie. Gene Hackman basically on the trail of these bad drug dealers that he's trying to catch before they get away. And I mean, good Lord, in a time where there wasn't really special effects and there, I'm sure stuntmen galore, but like wasn't really special effects and CGI and all of the things that your average Fast and the Furious movie might have. What a crazy movie. And probably one of the few times ever that I am aware of, and our readers, our viewers here will hopefully fact correct me either in real time or after the fact in the comments. But I'm pretty sure one of the few times that a movie based on a car chase won Oscars in serious capacity. Friedkin has passed away tragically this week due to heart failure and pneumonia, according to his family. He was 87 years old. He had done movies past The French Connection and The Exorcist, and most recently, probably the mid-90s, the movie Jade or The Rules of Engagement a few years later. Apparently, after many years of not having a new movie, he had recently completed his last movie, which was called The Caine Mutiny Court Martial, which was at least recently reported to be coming out this September, his final film. Also, in other tragic death news, we have Margolis in the world of television and movies too as well, an actor who had done over 70 roles in various movies, but most famously remembered for his part as Hector Tio Salamanca on Breaking Bad and Better Call Saul, which is a whole part of that Vince Gilligan, Bryan Cranston series of Walter White and Jesse Pinkman stories that everybody loved, that, was a crazy, shocking story. So Mark Margolis played one of the pivotal characters in the whole arc revolving around the Chicken Man. And, I'm not going to go into all the details of Breaking Bad's plot here, but let's just say it was a big bomb and a big boom. And it was a pretty incredible series of events, and he did a wonderful job. Some people might remember him for various other smaller parts that he did over his career, including a really funny part in the very first real Jim Carrey movie, Ace Ventura: Pet Detective. He had a small but funny part in there. He was 83 years old, also passed away, according to his family, from a short illness. And then, which has been kind of a big story brewing for years in the world of music, Tory Lanez has been sentenced to 10 years in prison. Now, this comes on the heels of a prior conviction from an event where he allegedly shot the rapper Megan Thee Stallion in the foot, following an argument and a confrontation after a party. Apparently they were in a car together, allegedly got into some kind of argument, and then allegedly he pulled out a gun and shot her in the foot. Allegedly. He was convicted of this, and ultimately various different people were coming forward asking for leniency in his sentencing. There was no question that he was going to be sentenced, but at least as of now, he's going to prison for 10 years. Now, coming away from all of this super sad news, and, rest in peace to all of those that passed away, their families, their friends, everybody, and their fans that love them in their careers, I wanted to talk about something that I thought was a little bit happier before we get into today's special interview. And I want to talk about a band that don't think a lot of people have been thinking about, recently, and it came kind of back into my mind because of another project that we've written about a lot over the years. And there's a band that Mike Watt is a part of called, and I'm going to pronounce this wrong, please, those that are native Italian speakers, please don't shoot me for this, Il Sogno del Marinaio, which is, you know, a 3-part kind of experimental band that Mike Watt is a part of. Mike Watt's a wonderful bass player that used to be a part of the Minutemen. And ultimately, they're doing an album in tribute to the late Miles Seaton. Miles Seaton was one of the 3 members of a wonderful band called Akron Family. Now, Akron Family came up in the mid-2000s as indie rock was kind of exploding, and there was just some level, there was a small measure of experimental stuff that was kind of becoming popular in indie circles. Like you have your Devendra Banharts, and you know, you have your Vashti Bunyans, and then you have, of course, Animal Collective. There were certain pockets of this, and I think the Unicorns you could call being kind of like something that was in that ilk in that time. But of course, a lot of indie rock stuff was a decent degree safer. It wasn't wildly experimental music. Akron Family came on the scene almost out the gate, and, you know, was recommended to me by a person at a party. I never saw the guy again. Just someone was like, dude, you should check out Akron Family. They're really wonderful. And, you know, I'm okay, sure. Some guy at a party. And then I had a chance to hear them, and whoever this random guy was that I'll never remember the name of, he was right. They were a wonderful, crazy, and really special band. And, you know, they kind of came in early, coming out of New York originally as a part of Young God Records, which was Michael Gira from the Swans record label. Swans were kind of inactive at this time. Michael Gira was doing Angels of Light and, you know, other projects and releasing other people's music. And so Akron Family became one of the mainstay bands on that label, which also Devendra Banhart came out of at the same time, by the way. And the first record that I got to really sit down and hear, you know, and really sit with was their split album that they had done kind of as the backing band for Michael Gira, which is, you know, very like Bob Dylan in the band kind of esque kind of situation. And I'm just remembering at this point, as much time as I took preparing this show, rest in peace, Robbie Robertson from the band. There's another piece of tragic news this week. Sorry about that for not including that earlier in the show. But at any rate, in that very Bob Dylan in the band way, Akron Family and Angels of Light was an album that was kind of both things. It was a bunch of straight Akron Family songs. And then there was about 5 or 6 songs in the record where they were the backing band for, you know, Angels of Light, which was basically Michael Gira. And it was just a jaw-dropping record. Like, people who essentially came to the conclusion that there was never a bad time for folksy music to be wildly experimental, to push the boundaries of pace and time and tempo and melody. Also, tolerance of the listener, you know, like balancing things that were like completely cacophonous and chaotic against the most beautiful and angelic of sequences, but then also challenging the notions of, you know, your verse, chorus, verse, abacab kind of song structure, you know, verse, chorus, bridge, chorus kind of thing, your average pop song. And ultimately kind of forcing the listener to be challenged massively as a part of the experience. And, you know, there was just so much that was really, really, really special in what they accomplished there. So I, and of course, part and parcel of that mixed down, and a lot of other magazines too, became big fans of what Akron Family was doing in those years that followed. And they had a series of more and more and more impressive records, followed by even more impressive shows. Now, the primary 3 members, there were other auxiliary members earlier in the band's history, but were Seth Alinsky, Dana Jansen, and then, of course, now the late Miles Seaton. And the 3 of them, when they performed live, it was just a different experience. I mean, I wouldn't call it a jam band, because it wasn't like they were just off noodling in space, right? Like, there certainly are, like, I saw Blues Traveler once in my life, and Blues Traveler was just jamming and just kind of going. I took my sister to go see Blues Traveler because she liked some of the pop hits from the 90s. And, you know, they did a 45-minute rendition of Runaround. That was noodling. That was, even my sister didn't like that. So for Akron Family, it was a little bit more like they were kind of finding the pocket. You know, it's kind of a musician thing. Like, they could kind of go as a chemistry, as a unit, and just let things elongate and then find the moment, push it to the limit, and then know instinctively when to draw it back. And they were kind of building in stature and acclaim in the different things they were doing as they were going, as they were growing as a band. And, you know, ultimately, there was one particular tour in the aftermath, because they had a series of great records. There was, of course, the self-titled record in 2005, the one I already mentioned, Akron Family and Angels of Light. But then they did a shorter album called Meek Warrior, and then a really lovely record called Love is Simple. And it's just a beautiful, beautiful record. And one of my favorite songs of that era, of the early 2000s, is the song on that record called There's So Many Colors. If you haven't listened to it, go listen to it. It's shockingly good. But at any rate, in that tour that followed Love is Simple, they were touring with the Dodos, and the Dodos effectively were a part of the live stage of the band. So in addition to opening, they were kind of also a part of Akron Family. And we saw them here in Los Angeles behind that tour, the Troubadour, and it was like 8-part harmonies. I mean, it was ridiculous how they were working together as a unit. I personally would have thought that it would have been great to assimilate the Dodos into the band permanently and just have them be a part of the band. It was such an incredible experience, and it was so much fun to behold. And a couple of years later, they had their, next record, which might have been like kind of the apex of their popularity, which was called Set 'Em Wild, Set 'Em Free. And it also was an album that pretty amazingly spoke to the darkness of the economic fallout of those years in the wake of the housing market crash, and also the incredible calamities to come in the decade that followed. I mean, just a world weary but incredibly hopeful record. Well, a friend of mine and I was working at Ticketmaster at the time. I basically said, "This band is amazing, come with me." She went blind, not knowing anything about the band. And they played at a small venue that I don't even know has ever done shows since, at Sunset Boulevard in Los Angeles. And I mean, it looked like, if you went and saw a high school play, I don't know what it was. I honestly don't even remember the name of the venue, but it was a small kind of like, they must have rented it. They did 3 shows there. We went and saw one of them, and they pretty much did a worked out version of Set 'Em Wild, Set 'Em Free. And it was one of those like just spellbinding, career making kind of moments where like listening to and observing this show was like, why even have a recording studio? I mean, most people spend weeks, months, sometimes even years trying to make something sound so fluid and so amazing. And Akron Family were so good at their chemistry and their ability to work things out and make things beautiful, to understand the space of performance. I mean, it almost begged to question, why didn't they just record that and put that out? I mean, that was as impressive as anything. And, that record in particular, thinking about all of this and the news, that led me to come to the conclusion to remember so many great records and so many great years that this band had. There's a few songs in particular on that record that if you haven't heard, just like there's So Many Colors from, Love is Simple, you have to hear if you haven't heard. And one of them was one that Miles Seaton specifically performed, which was called River. I can't really go into too much detail about it other than to say it's just kind of the best kind of playful, something that seems incredibly inviting and loving and just charming. And for a band that can be very chaotic and noisy and have massive undulations and what sonically and stylistically they're doing, it's just top notch. I mean, I could see it being covered by almost anyone of like significant talent now and being a massive hit. I mean, it's just that simple. There's also the Alps and their Orange Evergreen, but then there's another song later in the record that's a bit longer called They Will Appear. But then most prominently, another one sang by Seaton. There's just beautiful song talking about the embrace of life, trying to be happy, trying to not let adversity or anything get in your way, trying to find some kind of space. And I mean, it's kind of the same refrain in a God Only Knows, the Beach Boys God Only Knows kind of way, where it's the sun will shine and I won't hide. And that's what leads into the finale of the record, which is kind of an incredible prophetic statement for what it was our world at that point and the world that we found ourselves in, which is the 3 of them all singing an old-timey kind of like barbershop quartet harmony, where they're saying over and over again, last year was such a hard time for such a long time. This year's going to be ours. Such an incredible finale to a beautiful, beautiful record. Now, they had a couple albums after that. Akron Family 2, The Cosmic Birth and Journey of Shinju TNT, which was also a good record, and then Subverses, which was kind of a gear shift for them. It felt more like an experimentation in drone rock. It felt like they were going in different directions. I remember quite sadly, after being such a fan of them for so many years, they got a chance to play at Coachella. Now, they were playing the same year that Portishead was headlining the main stage, but also Prince was brought on kind of as a late headliner. And so wouldn't you know it, Portishead not really having done anything in years, Portishead's third had just come out. Everybody was really excited to see Portishead. I mean, who didn't want to see Portishead at that point? Portishead, one of the most unifying bands there is. People across genres of all kinds think Portishead is brilliant and beautiful. Akron Family set played in direct conflict to Portishead's set. Heartbreaking. I mean, if I were them, I would have been irate. Because talk about like the one set a band like Akron Family wouldn't want to play against. Who knows how many people would have been there when they were really kind of buzzy and people were talking about them if they weren't playing at the time, the band that nobody would have liked to have missed. So unfortunate. And then basically the band had split up not long after in terms of Subverses coming out in 2013. They did a tour behind that and they split up at the end of the tour. And ultimately, Seth Alinsky went on and formed a band called Sidune, and then Dana Jansen went and started his Dana Boy project. Miles Seaton had kind of started doing solo work, and ultimately kind of midway through whatever you want to call the experience of the COVID-19 pandemic, on February in 2021, Miles Seaton died in a car accident. Now, there's not a lot of details about what happened. He was 41 years old when he passed away, but apparently, according to testaments and statements about people who knew him and loved him, single car accident of some kind, maybe had something to do with a car that wasn't working correctly. There's not really a lot of details that are out in the public about it. But of course, kind of like the Beastie Boys, a trio that the three members were just everything to the band. And unfortunately, not possible to see that chemistry, again, robbed from us way too soon. A guy who just made incredible art, incredible singer too. All three of the members of Akron Family all sang at different points and harmonized all the time. And I kind of described Akron Family as like, kind of like feeling like you were in, a big tent with a campfire in the middle and everyone was singing at each other from different directions. That choral communal feeling. Just such a wonderful little piece of history. So if you're not familiar, if you have not heard Akron Family, I highly encourage to go and listen to all of their records, not the least of which Akron Family and Angels of Light, Love is Simple, and Set 'em Wild, Set 'em Free. I mean, just wonderful. I doubt I can come up with a more impressive song than There's So Many Colors, because that's kind of like four songs stapled in one. People talk about like Franz Ferdinand's Take Me Out, and they're like, it's two songs. And I mean, it is. Franz Ferdinand's great. It's no problem. I'm not trying to hate on Franz Ferdinand. But like people talk about Take Me Out as that's kind of like two songs stapled together. And it is. There's So Many Colors is like 4 or 5 songs stapled together. And seamless, flawless, all make sense together. Jaw-droppingly great. I don't know how anybody composes like that. It's like if somebody took Frank Zappa's level of skill, but made it like purposefully, like intentionally, not just goofing around, like just really focused on trying to make something impressive. So that's it for our editorial today. And we're going to go into our feature interview, which was again with Adam Hines and Brian Cannon from Night School Studio and Oxenfree 2 Lost Signals. Had a really great time talking to these guys. Really wonderful game. If you haven't played it, you absolutely should. If you're a fan of video games, it's what we would call kind of like a side-scrolling choose your own adventure. So it's branching dialogue. You play the game, you play the characters, and they're basically examining an island. The first Oxenfree was a place called Edwards Island, and then this one is another one. It's kind of a larger one. It's a kind of a small town called Camino Coast. And what it is these characters, you kind of control the characters, and it's not exactly really anything to do with fighting. It's a story. It's an experience and adventure. And, the characters all interact, and there's these 3 little bubbles that appear in the points of conversation. So you have to make choices about what the characters are talking about, and you have to make choices about what they're going to say, and then that impacts kind of irrevocably the path of the game, and at least how the characters interface with each other and what things kind of how they feel about each other. It's all kind of an elaborate tapestry of choices kind of daisy chained together. Now, the first one, the one that took place in Edwards Island, the first Oxenfree, involved a group of kids kind of going out to party and then stumbling onto an incredible mystery that involved ghosts. And it was very spooky, and there's the wonderful mechanic where they have these like little, shortwave radios, and if they tune them into the right frequency, it's kind of like they're tapping into another dimension and the ethereal plane or purgatory or limbo, whatever you want to call it. And it was very spooky, but beautifully drawn and beautifully rendered, and a really fun, engaging little narrative. Just a very different experience if you're not someone who's like a Twitch gamer who's looking to run and gun and fight things. If you're looking for an engrossive narrative, this is where you need to be. So the sequel, which takes place again in the larger town of Camino Coast, is a much bigger game, which doesn't exactly involve kids. It involves people that are kind of a little bit further along in life, maybe late 20s, early 30s, and is an extension of the story, but it's not exactly a direct sequel, but you should play it. And also it's really interesting because they are partnered with Netflix. If you're a person who is, a mobile phone user or a tablet user that has access to Netflix, you should. And of course, there's different device specifications. I'm not going to get into all that miasma, but like, for example, on my mobile phone, there is basically the ability that because you have a Netflix account, can play Oxenfree 2 Lost Signals for free on the phone. You have to be logged into Netflix, and then it validates you, and then it's just kind of an added part of the service as a part of their growing video game initiative. So we're going to wrap it up here, but for everyone, please stick around, watch the interview with Adam Hines and Brian Cannon from Night School Studio. And essentially, as I always do, I want to thank all of you for watching the show and for engaging with us anywhere that you do. If you don't already, please follow us here on Twitch, subscribe to us on YouTube, wherever you engage with our content, whether it's here in Twitch or whether you're watching the show after the fact on YouTube. We post these on YouTube early the next week, Tuesday or Wednesday the following week. Wherever it is you engage with us, thank you for engaging with us. If it's there or if it's in YouTube Shorts or if it's in Facebook or Instagram Reels. And now Mixdown's on TikTok. So if you're a TikToker, come to TikTok and Tick and Talk with us. I know that was probably the lamest, most old fogiest thing I've ever said, but I did it and I'm going to stick with it. And ultimately, thank you again for anywhere where you engage with this content. Please check back with us every week. We're going to be here every Thursday at roughly 5:30 p.m. Pacific time. And, we have a lot more to come. There's a bunch more of these Summer Game Fest interviews where we basically drug all our camera gear around this floor and spoke to as many different people as we can. So we have a bunch more of that coming. And as I've been teasing, some great other announcements coming about other video content we're going to do. This is going to be a new part of everything that we are here at Mixdown, in addition to all the written content you've ever known in music, movies, games, and television, and our satellite sister team over in the UK, Mixdown UK. So please join us again next week. Stick around for the interview. So glad to see you well. Are we all right? Okay, everybody. Raymond Flotat here again for MXDWN.com at Summer Game Fest. And you probably have some sense in the noise floor in the back. This is the chaos of the main floors. I am here with Adam and Bryant of Oxenfree 2 Lost Signals. How you guys doing?
Good, pretty good.
Yeah,
Great.
Yeah. And now, we're big fans of the first Oxenfree.
Awesome.
Yes, we always really loved this game. It was a beautiful little piece of life. And I'm the kind of person that once I get to know something, we do a lot of music, movies, games, and television, and once I like something, I don't shut up about it. And so I told a lot of people, stop what you're doing and play this game.
Well, thank you for that.
You're welcome. And that's the thing. There's like a high barrier of entry. It has to be great, but once it's great, it's like I tell everyone in the world I've got to do it. So it's been some years since the first one, and by our count, what, 6?
Like 7 years.
7 years.
Yeah.
And I mean, I don't feel like, tell me if I'm wrong, this hasn't been in development since the last one hit.
No.
Yeah. A game between it. 2 games between it. Yeah.
You had a couple games.
Yeah.
Okay, so there was a pause,
Yes.
then you came back.
Exactly.
So now the big question that I was asking, and as soon as we sat down and we started playing the game, is it's kind of on a different island, at least as far as what you could say so far.
Yeah.
The main island from the first story is still there, right? But effectively, it's like a lot of this is set in a new island, the same mythology, the same universe, but different characters. So in a very Life is Strange 1 versus 2 kind of way, I'm going to start with why new characters?
It's a good question. So we didn't want to have the same characters of the first one for really only one reason, and it was just because we didn't want them to become kind of like a Scooby-Doo gang that was always coming into like the story of the week. Like now we have to have them fighting werewolves or something.
Sure.
So we wanted to keep the world and the same weird rules that we had for the world to explain how supernatural craziness can happen.
Yes.
So we wanted to have a different cast, kind of an older cast, one that is going through much the same kind of turmoil that the first game's cast was. That
Sure.
they're kind of coming of age, you're dealing with obstacles and challenges in your life, you're making strong decisions and deciding if you made the right choices in the past. And then a bunch of ghosts attack you to mirror and reflect your personal struggles. But now the characters are a little older. They're a little more kind of having a quarter-life crisis, sort of a thing.
Are they still roughly like 18? Or
they're not. They're in like early 30s.
Oh,
now.
They're that far ahead.
Exactly.
And that explains why the character was complaining about his back, his spine.
Yes,
and like,
exactly.
I'm like, he seems a little young for having like bad spine problems going on.
Yes.
Okay.
But it's the exact same town. So
Yes.
in the first game they went up to Edwards Island.
Right.
And they talked about Kamina back home. Now you get to actually see their hometown. So it's a lot bigger. The cast is huge. You have a walkie-talkie, so you can contact a lot more people that are on the mainland now.
Sure.
So it's the same vibe, but just a little older.
And now, is there any sense? I mean, you can't say.
Yeah.
Please forgive me, but I have to go there. Is there a sense of how much time has passed since the last game?
They directly say it's like 5 years.
So it's been 5 years since the events of everything that happened there.
Exactly.
Now, it's been a minute. I do a lot of things, so you will forgive me for not having a perfect recognition of the plot summary of the first game, because I loved every second of it. But what I remember, I felt like it came to a conclusion where it was kind of like zipped up. The ghosts were
done.
Free.
Exactly.
Done. The ghosts are free, right?
Yeah.
Like she saved them from limbo, right? And we're, limbo.
Well, she could have, depending on your ending. She could have. Yeah.
See, I didn't give it enough tries to go through and find that out. Okay, so now I'm learning stuff after the fact here. I feel like a dunce in this moment. But effectively, so very much not over, regardless of the ending.
Well, no. Really, depending on the ending that you got, it could have been very buttoned up, very zipped up.
All right.
At least a version of Alex and her friends.
Okay.
Because we're dealing with timelines, there's a lot of multiple versions, multiple realities that you're kind of bouncing around between. And that was actually part of the challenge of writing and making this one, was trying to decide how to pick what's canon, how to pick what do we stick with.
And so is that to say that one branch of the story is burnt off and sold off, and then this is the branch that could go on?
Well,
like from the first game.
We're kind of cheeky with it.
All right.
Where we get to acknowledge a lot of the different versions of an ending that you could have gotten, because the rules of the world are still exactly the same.
Sure.
Where you can see peeks into other timelines, and the ghosts in this game, just like in the first game, kind of have an awareness of all the possibilities. So they know what could have happened, what didn't happen.
So you're wading into string theory now.
Yes,
There's a multi-dimensional oxen-free.
Very heady, yes.
Yeah, man. No, hey, I'm with it. I'm with it. I like to believe that there's a reality where I'm a woman, where I'm president, where I'm a rock star.
Where you're a lizard.
I'll settle for not bald. Like, I would settle for that in some permutation of existence.
Exactly.
So this is the oxen-free of verse.
Yes, that's a good one. We're going to steal that.
Oxen-free is cinematic universe.
The oxen-free cinematic, the multiverse oxen-free verse. Very cool. And so how much, I mean, let's put it this way. The first game was neat, compact, right? Like, you could do this. If you were like one of those like drive-in gamers, you could burn through this game in a few days, right? Like, some people like me, I take months on something as the size of the first game because I got a lot of things to do in my life, right? But there are other people who are like, I'm going to finish Tears of the Kingdom in 5 days, right? So does this one more in terms of scale than the first? Yes.
Yeah, it is a bit bigger. It is maybe like twice as big as the first game.
Okay.
In terms of just like sheer size, but also just the time it'll take to get you through the game. But there are also additional kind of like, I don't want to call them side quests, but like little side stories you can find on the walkie-talkie and in the world that expand it and allow the players to spend more time there.
Very cool. Yeah. Very cool. And I would guess by just what little I saw in a demo here, you do go back to the original island at some point?
Well, it's there.
It's there.
We won't spoil if you go back, but it's there. It's always there.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. That's fair. I mean, and I figured probably a big deal if you do go back. So,
Yes.
There's like the ghosts of the kids from the original game in some permutation of the oxen-free-averse, as we've now dubbed it.
Exactly.
Very cool. So it is a little bigger at least, and bigger as a whole, as a story and an experience, and more side quests that you can do within that. And I mean, again, I whenever I'm talking to people in games, of course, I'm very sensitive and understanding. I'm not trying to like spoil shit for people like that. There's no point in that. I'm not trying to ruin the experience for everyone. So it's like, but I'm trying to think of what are the more interesting things that we can dive into here. And I'm guessing, because of course in the first game there were certain ways certain characters could end up purely by the whole progression, right? In a very Life is Strange way, the further you went in one direction, you could push one outcome or you could push another outcome.
Right.
So, in theory, how many possible outcomes are we talking about here? Like, how many different ways could this one wrap up?
We actually kind of approach it a different way. We don't have like X number of endings.
Ah.
We like to, in the first Oxenfree, you saw that photo at the very end.
Sure.
That was kind of our collage of your ending. So there are a lot of permutations of that.
Sure.
Whether or not Ren and Nona get together, whether or not you end up with reconciling with Clarissa or not.
Sure.
And what you choose, how you choose to deal with the ghosts in the end. All of those were reflected in like the final scene. That's kind of the approach we're taking. Again, just like not trying to say like they're like very specific things that can happen.
Sure.
It's kind of like all tailored towards everything you've chosen up to this point.
So it's more of like seasoning. That's the
Sure,
metaphor I'm going to go with.
Yeah, it's
The amount of flavor, you know, like some people like really salty French fries.
Sure, yeah.
And some people like no salt French fries.
Some people like spicy French fries.
Right,
Yeah.
and some people like that like goop with like the, you
Yeah,
know,
poutine or
the
something.
collard
Yeah,
greens
yeah.
and
exactly, absolutely.
Ugh. I
Yeah.
tried that once and I almost died. So
It's a lot.
no, so there's a lot of different gradients in terms of the possibility of the outcome, but it's not like you got ending A, ending B.
Right.
Yeah.
And there may be some choices that'll affect it a little bit more, but we try to not treat any choices too precious.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we're big fans of Life is Strange at Mixdown,
Yeah.
and effectively anything that's choose your own adventure kind of things like this, where they're multi-branching narratives. And one of the things that I wasn't super over the moon about Life is Strange 2 when it finally happened was there's literally failed state endings, right? Like you get to the end, there's like, oh, this is kind of a happy ending, this is kind of a shit ending, and then there's like, you're arrested and you're hiding in Mexico. Spoilers, sorry. But that was the kind of thing that was, I don't know, certainly irksome. I mean, there's a different kind of environment there, and I won't go down that road. But anyway, back to your game. So now, it could be the TV, right? There's a lot of limitations in the TV, so I want to like give some credence to that. But my sense of it, from like a depth of field and a depth of color,
Yeah.
right? It looks. I mean, original one I played on PC,
Yeah.
and I'm, you know, something that size, right? Not the biggest screen, not the best graphics card. It looked
Right.
great. It was gorgeous. I love the art style, but this feels infinitely more detailed. Am I right in that estimation, or am I
You
just
are.
kind of breathing
Yes,
life into
you
it?
are.
Okay.
No, when we built Oxenfree, we like, you know, the most powerful console was a PS4, right?
Yep.
So we were building it towards HD, right? And now it looks beautiful on a 4K screen because we built it for 4K. We authored the assets at 4K. That's not something we can really upscale Oxenfree right now because we authored it at such a lower scale. So everything's a lot crisper, but also everything moves, right? Like the little plants, the trees move. Like we wanted to add more life and more depth to the look from the first game to kind of like plus it up.
Without getting lost to tech-heavy details, because I'm sure we could spend an hour talking just about that.
Yeah.
But how much more does it take to make that work? To get that level of like, there's a plant blowing in the breeze, and now the breeze changes direction. Like, how much did that add to the development time for all this?
Not too much. We have a bit bigger of a team. When we made Oxenfree, it was like 6 people.
Yeah.
Now we have about 20 people working on this game.
Yes.
So we have like dedicated tech artists who write the shaders to make the trees, you know, sway in the wind and things like that.
Sure.
So yeah, it would like time-wise, it wasn't too much, but now that we have like so many great talents on the team, we're able to do stuff like that.
Beautiful. Now, here's the thing that I find in situations with really compelling narratives like this, right? And I have this trouble across all the mediums we cover, and not so much music, but like, because music usually get to hear the whole thing, and then you get to digest and write about
Exactly,
it. But
yeah.
a lot of the time when you're doing stuff for games, for movies, or for TV, you're reacting to something that you have not seen the totality of it, right? Like, now, of course, if we're reviewing it, that's a different story. But in an instance like this, I don't know the end game. And then some of the richest, most interesting stuff to me is the meaning behind the story and how it all connected. And by the time, like, you know, and there's also spoiler concerns, right? Fans want to play it and find out for themselves. So when we go and write a review something like this, we're not like, oh, here's how it ends, right? Like, that's not the first thought of what we're doing.
Yeah.
But then the problem is 3 months, 6 months down the line, everybody's moved on, right? Like, press concerns have moved on, and it's kind of hard to work back on those things. And also, people in your position are usually moving on to other projects, or maybe you're just on freaking vacation, you know, which you probably need at this point.
Yeah.
So I guess what I'm trying to scratch at here, without going into spoilery turf, in terms of that kind of thing, thematic resonance, right? And there was, as you said, a coming-of-age story in the first game. There was a lot about these kids trying to find their comfort level with each other. There was a lot of, like, tinglings of romance and awkwardness, and I mean, that all sounds like being 16. That sounds like 16 to me. What can you reveal without spoiling anything of the major juice in the story, right? In terms of what is explored in this one. Is it the same? or are there different things that you're going deeper in? Because you said yourself, they're in their early 30s, right?
Yeah.
Different place of life.
Yeah. They're definitely different things. So they're definitely different in that the cast of the first one, since they're teens,
right,
it's all forward-facing, all their concerns. It's like, what am I going to be? What am I going to go do?
Yes.
What's really, what makes me impassioned?
No.
Whereas this one is all about the choices that they've already made,
yes,
and deciding if that's the right course that they want to stick to, or if they made mistakes and they want to go back and change some things, if they want to change course, or if they love what they're doing and just want to commit still.
Wow.
So it's a lot more kind of backwards facing in terms of the choices that they've already made that the player gets to grapple with as newcomers to their lives now.
I got to say, as a 42-year-old man, I feel seen and attacked.
It's meant to be both.
I really do. I feel seen and attacked at this moment. And I think to wrap up, the best place to wrap up, and once again, endings notwithstanding, I'm trying to tiptoe around the good stuff, so I'm sorry in that respect. But how many more? 3, 4, 5? How many Oxenfrees do you think will go?
We have to get to Oxen 3 because we keep making that joke, so we have to make it.
If it's not called that, like fast,
What's
too
the
fast,
point?
too furious.
Exactly.
If you don't do that, I'm disappointed.
What would be the point?
That's what we should have called it.
Oxen 3, the third legacy.
Oxen 3, that'll be the capper probably. No, honestly, we haven't thought about it. We haven't even thought about it yet.
We wanted to make Oxen 3 too is because we had a new story to tell in that universe. And I think if a new story comes, then we'll think about it.
Sure.
But until then, we don't know.
You don't know plans right now, but it could, theoretically.
It could.
Excellent. Well, guys, thank you so much for your time.
Of course, thank you.
Thank you so much for such a wonderful piece of art. I mean that holistically and truly.
Thank you.
And so hopefully, and I don't know, soon, I'll be able to play the whole damn thing. So
in like 4 weeks.
July 12th.
Right.
Yeah, exactly.
Probably him, that guy there, and his crew will get to do it first, because that's the thing of being editor-in-chief. Like, I have to let them do that part while I'm trying to run the whole damn show. But
exactly.
I'll get to it.
Yeah.
I can do that.
Awesome.
Thanks so much, guys.
Well,
I really appreciate it.
Yeah, of course. Thank you.
So nice to meet you both.
Great to meet you.
Indeed. Thank you so much for your time.
Thanks, of course. You too.